This year I'm celebrating my 20th anniversary as a guitar teacher, and during this time I've repeatedly seen the same mistakes in many of my hundreds of students. Today I'm gonna save you years of frustration. It is very important for your own learning success that as a beginner you first focus on making guitar practice a fixed part of your daily routine. Those among my students who gave up playing guitar quickly almost always experienced practice as a burden and sometimes even as stressful. When I asked them at the beginning of a lesson whether they had managed well with the material from the previous lesson, I almost always got the same excuses. Too much stress at work from my older students, too much homework from my younger students. They were too tired to practice in the evening. On weekends they also didn't have time because they were out doing things, and so on and so on. Of course, it can happen that you really have a lot to do, but if that's the case every single week, then the real problem is that you perceive guitar practice as such a burden that you keep finding excuses to avoid it. Just like people do with their next diet, a long time overdue dentist appointment, or their tax return. What also doesn't work, unlike in school by the way, is simply quickly skimming through the material the day before the next lesson. As soon as you reach the point where the exercises go a little beyond the absolute basics, you can no longer rely on the idea that you are still just a beginner and that every beginning is hard, meaning you just need more time for the first reprogress. It is very important to understand that you always need to spend time with your instrument if you want to achieve any results at all. If you are still struggling with this, I recommend watching this video of mine. There you will learn how to manage your guitar practice without stress and with a simple trick even on your busiest days. The equipment you use is important in the sense that you should feel comfortable with it. Someone who buys an extremely cheap guitar because they are not yet sure whether playing guitar is something long-term for them will often be disappointed after a short time. Poorly finished frets, a very high action that is hardly adjustable, and electronics that start causing problems after a short while will quickly force you to buy a better instrument. At the same time, you won't be able to sell the cheap guitar again, and in the end you will have spent more money than you intended. Nowadays you can get relatively high quality guitars and also amps for comparatively little money, which you can even continue to use later when you eventually upgrade to something higher end. I've included here a selection of acoustic guitars, electric guitars and practice amps with prices that you can basically not go wrong with. Anything below this price level I would not recommend. However, spending more does not automatically mean you are doing the right thing. For those of you with a larger budget, an expensive guitar, different effect pedals and other accessories are not a shortcut to success. My guitar teachers back then, when I had only been playing for about a year and desperately wanted a Gibson Les Paul, taught me that it is much better to play a reasonably good beginner guitar and, in the case of electric guitar, a practice amp for as long as it takes until you reach the point where you can actually produce a good sound with it. Only after that does higher quality equipment really have a positive effect on your playing. Even though it was already clear to me very early on that I wanted to do nothing else in my life but play guitar, I still struggled for the first 3 years with a terrible Fender Rock Bro 700, which however constantly forced me to give every single note my full attention. When I finally got my Marshall, I already knew exactly what to do with it, which meant my playing could develop further even on a €400 Epiphone Les Paul. Only 2.5 years later did I finally buy my first Gibson, which again made me take a big leap in my playing. Every upgrade actually meant something because I had earned it. If you are taking lessons from a guitar teacher who genuinely puts thought into you and your playing, then you should primarily focus on the material they go through with you. One of my students, who made hardly any progress during our time together, spent more time clicking through multiple YouTube videos and constantly buying new gadgets than actually practicing what we covered in our lessons in a focused way. A good guitar teacher has a plan for you and your success. They will also respond to your wishes, but they will make sure that those wishes match your current level. If you feel under-challenged, you should definitely bring that up. But in that case, you also need to provide the necessary proof by first mastering the suggested exercises. If you are ever unsure why you should be working on extremely boring basic exercises when you would rather become a shredder right away and play Master of Puppets immediately, then think back to experiences you've had learning other things in your life. Imagine your teacher had placed a thick, complex novel in front of you in first grade and told you if you can't read it yet, just spend several days on the first page and try to memorize letter by letter. Or imagine your driving instructor had taken you to a racetrack in your very first driving lesson and said, just imitate the other drivers here, it will work out eventually. The fundamentals are exactly what later make it not only easier to learn the harder things, but also to retain them better. Not only I myself, but also my students who have worked intensively on rhythm, theory, finger exercises, and certain concentration exercises have been able to learn new songs, licks, and solos in a very short time and integrate them directly into their playing. A rather poor way of looking at long-term and especially sustainable results on the guitar is to measure your success only by which songs, or in many cases even just parts of them, you can already play. If you constantly focus only on imitating others and at the same time ignore all aspects of making music such as musical connections or concepts like improvisation, songwriting, music theory and harmony, then in the end you forget more than you actually learn. Often with this strategy you end up working on songs, riffs, licks and solos that are far above your current level. As a result, you often spend weeks or even months trying to imitate something difficult while neglecting all the other things you should actually be working on. As I said before, a good guitar teacher will of course also teach you your favorite songs, but will always make sure that what you learn is fully understood and can be integrated into your own playing independently of the specific song. This brings me to one of the most important insights I first discovered for myself and later passed on to my most successful students. A structured practice plan is one of the best things you can create for yourself and your progress. In professional life, in finance, in sports, and in nutrition, whether it's about gaining or losing weight, people generally work with plans. My very best student ever was already inspired by this idea shortly after starting lessons with me. We created a practice plan for him, and then he sat down and practiced for 2 hours every day, even with a normal 8-hour workday. Here you can see a short excerpt from one of his music videos. Apart from the singing, he actually recorded all the instruments himself since he had already been active as a drummer for many years before taking lessons with me. Here you can also see one of my own practice plans from the past. I really took this time every day and usually with a few breaks in between work very focused on my playing. You can also create such a plan yourself if you only have half an hour or an hour per day to practice. If you do that and actually stick to it, you will make a huge leap in your development as a guitarist within just a few weeks, I guarantee it. And if you already have a good guitar teacher, then suggest creating a plan together. Especially we guitarists who are constantly surrounded by tabs and video lessons rarely think about ear training at all. However, having a good ear and being able to learn things without visual aids is essential for a musician. Not only are most of the tablatures you can download or buy in book form often not completely correct and should only be used as a supplement when learning guitar, but training your ear also improves your playing technique. Things like clean controlled vibrato, properly intonated bends, or the right sense for palm muting are directly connected to careful listening. Many of my students who had already played guitar before taking lessons with me were always genuinely surprised and excited when they learned to give every note the same attention while playing and also to pay attention to details in recordings before trying to copy them. Your musical listening experience also improves enormously when you are eventually able to discover completely new things just by careful listening, even in songs you have known and loved for years. For this purpose, I've linked the Functional Ear Trainer, a free tool that lets you train your ear in a playful way with just a few minutes per day. Feel free to try it out. It's worth it and it's actually fun. Finally, I want to talk about something that more and more people in today's age of instant gratification are unlearning: dedicating yourself to something over the long term with a lot of patience. There are now several studies that clearly show how much our attention span has suffered in recent years under the influence of an ever faster digital world. I have unfortunately noticed this not only in many of my students, but also to some extent in myself, and I am now working hard to fix this problem. Especially when practicing guitar, but also when actually playing, it is essential to fully focus for longer periods on what you are doing. Only then can real progress happen in the long run. However, what is extremely valuable for your progress, especially if you are a bit impatient like me and want to improve faster, is getting the most out of every practice session, no matter how short it is. Here are 3 tips that will help you achieve a lot even with little practice time. Number 1, always try to isolate difficult sections and play them on repeat. I have often observed that many guitarists, due to impatience, consistently ignore small mistakes while practicing in order to feel like they are getting through a song faster. However, this always leads to your playing becoming generally sloppy and full of errors. This reminds me of the question, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. If you try to eat the whole elephant at once, or 2 large pieces of it, you will overwhelm yourself. In small portions, over a longer period, it may feel slower at first, but it leads to more success experiences. 2. Try whenever possible to kill 2 birds with 1 stone while practicing. For example, when practicing scales, always use a metronome and add a rhythmic component to your finger patterns. At first, it is enough to play them in quarter notes, then 8th notes, and later 16th notes. Later, you can also use triplet accents or add some funky percussive hits. New chords can also always be combined with interesting rhythms or with flat picking or finger picking. Proper and efficient practice is just as much as a development process as all your other musical skills. So inform yourself about it just as often as you do about techniques, new songs, and licks. And 3, take 1 or 2 days per week where you do not practice guitar but simply play. On those days, you should either play along with original recordings of songs or improvise. This way, even without spending hours practicing, you build up a solid repertoire of songs and the ability to jam with others. And that's it for this video. I hope you had fun and were able to take away some important tips and strategies for success. If you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate likes and new subscriptions, and I'll see you again in the next video. Until then, all the best.